Greetings, Inland Empire. This is your latest edition of Political Empire, and I'm your host, Kim Pierceall with the Press Enterprise and PE.com. We've got a lot of political news for you, including an update on what's happening with Richard Grennell, who you've probably heard about in the news, resigned from the Romney campaign. He has a local connection, so we're going to be finding out a little bit more about that. And we're also going to have headlines and a few segments with our Washington, D.C. and Sacramento reporters. But first to headlines, Jeff Stone's Creek. Jeff Stone, the Riverside County Supervisor, has convinced his colleagues to sign on to forming a joint powers authority with the cities of Temecula, Murrieta, and Wildomar to essentially deepen and widen Murrieta Creek to prevent and hopefully, make sure that there's no catastrophic flooding that occurs there. They already have about $30 million, and they just need about $90 million more. And the reason why they're forming the JPA is because there wasn't really any federal money available. Second headline, we've got an auditing amendment. So anyone who's keeping an eye on the City of Riverside June 5th ballot, there are 7 charter amendments on that ballot, including Measure E. And Measure E would actually make the city auditor report to the city council instead of the city manager. So if you want to keep an eye out for that, that's going to be on the June 5th ballot. And then finally, Joe versus Josie Gonzalez. Joe Baca, the Democrat from Rialto, recently endorsed Josie Gonzalez, fellow Democrat who's running to keep her supervisorial seat in San Bernardino, endorsed her opponent in her race. And so he's endorsing Sylvia Marquin from Fontana. She's a community organizer. And Josie, granted, has already endorsed Joe Baca's opponent in his 35th congressional district race. So interesting happenings. Those are your headlines, and we're going to be right back with our Sacramento reporter, Jim Miller, who's going to tell us a little bit about the Senate race that's going on in Riverside right now. Welcome back. We have our Sacramento reporter Jim Miller with us live via phone to tell us a little bit about the 31st Senate race that's happening with 3 candidates right now. We've got Jeff Miller, no relation to our reporter Jim Miller, and we've got Richard Roth and Steve Clute. Jim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Sure thing, Kim. Thanks.
Tell us a little bit about this race. So just a quick overview of what's going on with the 31st right now.
Sure. This is a new seat. There's no incumbent, and it's almost even in terms of voter registration. So it's a pretty exciting place. You have one Republican, Jeff Miller, and 2 Democrats, Steve Clute and Mr. Richard Roth, as you were saying, who are all competing to be the top 2 finishers next month.
And this is for a district that stretches from Corona to Moreno Valley. And like you said, there are 2 Democrats. Curious, how are they differentiating themselves? Because, yeah, there's 2 Democrats in this race.
Yeah, not a whole lot. That's been my observation. They have similar views in terms of how they've been answering some of the questions put to them. The difference, the obvious difference is, Clute served in the Assembly during the 1980s, and then unsuccessfully ran in several campaigns since then. Roth, who is president of the Monday Morning Group and a local businessman, he's making his first-time run for elective office. And Senate leadership and Democratic institutions, such as organized labor, generally support Roth, who they think has the best shot of winning in the fall.
And how are both parties viewing this race then?
Both are taking it very seriously. Democrats see the 31st as, first off, just an opportunity to finally get a Senate seat here in Riverside County, and then they also see it as, potentially vital to their goal of getting to a 2/3 majority in the state Senate. And with that 2/3 margin, they'd essentially be able to sideline Republicans on everything. And Republicans view this as a potential last stand to prevent that from happening. They think Miller can beat both Roth or Clute, but I think they would prefer Clute as their opponent just because of the previous experience where Clute has lost past campaigns.
Well, thanks for the update on that, Jim. Appreciate it. And we'll be keeping an eye on that Senate race. And going from the Senate to U.S. Congress now, we're going to look at the congressional race involving Mary Bono-Mack and Raul Ruiz. We have Ben Goad, our Washington, D.C. correspondent, on the line. Ben, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Tell us a little bit about this, because you've been covering this race, and the district covers Hemet, Banning, Beaumont, the Coachella Valley, and what's currently happening?
Well, the incumbent in the race is Republican Mary Bono-Mack. She's going after her 9th term. She's had a higher national profile than ever before this year. I mean, she's chairman of the House Subcommittee on Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade. She's been acting as a major surrogate for Mitt Romney. So she's got a high profile. And then on the other side, we've got Raul Ruiz, who's a political novice. He's never run for office, and he's the latest in a series of Democrats to go after Bono-Mack. He's got a pretty interesting story. He grew up in the Coachella Valley. Parents were farm workers. After high school, he went around asking local businesses to help him pay for college so he could become a doctor and then eventually come back and practice in Riverside County. And it worked. He went on to Harvard, and he got his degrees, and he's now an emergency room doctor out there at Eisenhower Medical Center in the district.
And like you said, there's been quite a few Democratic challengers to her seat. Do the Democrats think they have a chance this time?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, they've coveted this seat for a long time. It's a heavily Latino seat and becoming more so. And there are some large left-leaning pockets in the district, including in Palm Springs. Now, for the first time, they've got a Hispanic candidate in Ruiz who has proven to be a pretty solid fundraiser. But the reality is Bono-Mack has had challengers in the past, in the last couple of cycles, serious ones, and she's coasted through both times. So since there's only 2 candidates in the race, they're both assured to move on to the general election. So next month's primary will be more of an indicator and really shed some light on how close this race is really going to be.
Well, and speaking of Mary Bono-Mack, she recently had a addition to her campaign in a way, a volunteer of sorts. Richard Grennell, who is, or had been, the spokesman for Jeff Burham, who has been accused of wrongdoing in the Colonies case in San Bernardino. He had been hired by the Mitt Romney campaign, but then he left, and now he might be with the Mary Bono campaign. So, Ben, can you give us a little heads up on what's happening there? What's going on with Richard Grennell, this spokesman to ambassadors and San Bernardino developers?
Right. Romney tapped Grennell to be his spokesman on foreign policy issues. Grennell has a background. He's pretty accomplished in that area. He was served as a spokesman for former UN Ambassador John Bolton during the Bush administration. And as you mentioned, he's also done some work locally as a spokesman for Burham during those criminal proceedings. And he's also openly gay, and he favors same-sex marriage, and that didn't sit well with some folks on the right who criticized Romney's decision to bring him on. So ultimately, he stepped down on what was supposed to be his first day on the job.
And he's apparently working with Mary Bono now, but in what kind of capacity?
Right. So apparently, Grennell has a house out there in the desert. And on the same day that the news broke that he was leaving the Romney camp, Bono-Mack tweeted out that Grennell had offered to help her with her campaign. I talked to her campaign manager, Mark Trost, who said Grennell wasn't going to have an official position on the campaign, but he would be supporting her more or less as a volunteer, albeit one with a pretty high profile.
And he certainly got some time in this election to do so. So thanks for that update, Ben, and thanks, Jim, as well, for your update from Sacramento. And thanks, everybody, for watching Political Empire today, and certainly keep posted on PE.com to get the latest updates from all of our political reporters. We're also going to have a segment from our very own Dan Bernstein today, who's going to talk to us a little bit about Rusty Bailey's Hire One campaign. That's it. All you businesses out there, just hire one person, and then the unemployment situation will be solved.
American politicians have come up with many ways to jumpstart the American economy. There's the New Deal, the Fair Deal, the Square Deal. There's tax cuts for the rich. There's stimulus. There's trickle-down economics and supply-side economics. There's 999. But now, a local politician running for a relatively minor office has come up with what I think could be a game changer. I'm speaking of Rusty Bailey, the Riverside councilman who's a candidate for mayor. He has a Hire One program. Here's how Rusty says things. There are 20,000 unemployed residents of Riverside, but there are 10,000 business licenses. So if each business owner were to hire one unemployed Riverside resident, the unemployment rate would be cut in half. Think of the implications of this. There are about 12 million unemployed Americans. There have got to be at least 6 million business licenses out there. If 6 million businessmen hired one unemployed American, bingo, 4% unemployment overnight. Now I realize there'll be a vocal minority of businessmen who say, you know, if I wanted to hire somebody, I would have done it by now. Or, gee, sales and revenue are awfully low. I can't afford to hire anyone unless they're willing to work for $1.98 an hour with no benefits. But that's the defeatist attitude of the minority. When Riverside business owners realize that they can cut the city's unemployment in half just by hiring one person, they're going to say to themselves, why didn't I think of that?